Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. Oakville is a city that calls itself a town and feels like a village when we meet each other halfway. We work together to increase the harmony, prosperity, and safety of everyone in our town. Today, we're joined by Melissa Farrell, the CEO, the brand new CEO of Halton Healthcare. And Halton Healthcare, in case you don't know, is also Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital. So if you're watching from Oakville, that's your local angle. The question we're going to be exploring today is what changes are in store for Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital and Halton Healthcare now that we have a new CEO. Melissa, thank you very much for your service to our community, and I hope you will let me call you Melissa.
Absolutely. If you'll let
So,
me call you Rob. Yeah.
oh, please, please. I think I mean, after all, that's the name my mother gave me. I kind of like it. So give us a little brief take on where you're coming from, and then let's get into what changes we can expect.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. So, to give a little bit of context in terms of where I'm coming before coming to Halton Healthcare, largely my career actually was in the public service, working directly for government. So worked in the government, and by the time I left, was an assistant deputy minister in the Ministry of Health in particular. So I was there for almost 20 years, and really had the responsibility for a whole variety of different aspects of health and health related services while I was there. Largely worked, and certainly by the time I left, was working specifically in the hospital sector. So had the responsibility for hospitals, also integrated care, and we'll probably talk about that a little later too. But integrated care, the quality portfolio for the government, and then also responsibility for really just supporting um, overall funding models. So really exciting, kind of interesting career in the public sector. And part of what that means, being an assistant deputy minister in the government for those kinds of portfolios, is that you largely have the ability to influence what the legislation looks like. So, had the authority under the Public Hospitals Act to support hospitals in particular. I had the oversight responsibility for the sector, just as an example. But then it's also just the day-to-day relationship management with with the hospital sector in particular. So yeah, so spent a lot of time in government doing that, on the policy front lines, really supporting where we wanted to go in terms of health related vision. And then I actually left the public sector close to 5 years ago to work as the president of St. Joe's Healthcare Hamilton, so in the Hamilton community. And honestly, I got there, 6 months before the pandemic. So I spent the vast majority of my time at St. Joe's, really supporting the organization during the pandemic.
So,
Really was a
so,
pandemic leader.
so the amalgamation of the healthcare of Hamilton happened before you got there, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. If you're talking specifically about the hospital system, is that what you mean by that?
Actually, I'm not sure what I mean. I met a man just the other day who told me that he had chaired the amalgamation of a bunch of Hamilton healthcare hospitals,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah,
And
so what I would say about Hamilton that may be of interest to people is there's two different hospital systems in Hamilton. So there's one that's Hamilton Health Sciences. People would be, I think, quite familiar with Hamilton Health Sciences, an academic teaching center largely focused on, they have the cancer system, stroke, they have all the regular health related programming too, trauma center for Hamilton. And then they also have St. Joe's, which is separate. And St. Joe's is actually three-sided, has the Mental Health and Addictions Center, so the regional program for mental health, which we refer to here from Halton. But all the amalgamations or all the work that actually happened for those two systems, so both of them were all independent. Hamilton Health Sciences is 6 sites, and St. Joe's is 3. And all of that actually happened during the health services restructuring days, which is, close to 20 years ago. In fact, similarly, what happened here in Halton Healthcare. So Oakville and Milton actually amalgamated during the health services restructuring days as well. And then our Georgetown site actually came to us a little later, but a lot of the amalgamations of hospitals really happened during that time, that very important time in our history. Yeah.
yeah, my friends in Halton Hills have always referred to those days as the days they escaped the embrace of Osler. And and I'm not sure why they thought that was a good thing, but anyway, uh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
my
I mean,
limited
there was a
appreciation.
transition of the Georgetown Hospital from William Osler to Halton Healthcare, but we work really closely together between the two hospital systems, as you can appreciate, because the population that the Georgetown Hospital actually serves is largely Georgetown, Halton Hills, but it's also Brampton West, as you can appreciate. So there's this constant interaction between the two organizations to really support that population in that
Well,
community.
how neat is it for you that you get to be the one, it looks like, to build a new hospital for Georgetown?
I know, we're so excited. So, just to share with folks, if they don't know already, that about a week, I guess it would be a week and a half ago, we were able to announce a land donation from a grateful family. They've donated 105 acres to the hospital, essentially worth today anyway, $45 million. So a huge donation to the community. 105 acres is way more than what we need for a hospital, I would just say. So, what this is going to allow us to do on that property is really think about a community hub where there could be other health related services. So, really, really, really exciting for Georgetown, for the hospital to be thinking about how that community is going to grow and how we're going to increase the health related services there. So, we're pretty excited about that.
Is Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital going to grow or expand in any way? What vision do you have for Oakville?
Yeah, well, there's probably a couple things that are worth actually sharing, and maybe just to go back to comments that you've made yourself just about how much this population is growing. So I think it's worth speaking about Halton region overall and what we're seeing in terms of the demographic shifts and the changes.
Hmm?
So one of the things that I've been doing since I got here, and I've only been here since June, so I appreciate I can't say I'm a newbie for too much longer, but less than 6 months at this point in time. And what I would say is that the population in Halton is expected to double what the population is today. So the growth is pretty astronomical, and I know that you're planning for that from a municipal perspective as we're trying to think about health-related services. Same thing's actually going to happen with seniors. So we're anticipating that the seniors population itself is actually going to double too in the next 10 to 15 years. So that's massive change. And you can appreciate from a health related perspective, that kind of seniors use health services. That's just the truth of it. So a lot of the care that's actually delivered in hospitals is complex seniors care. That's the way that we have to think about it. So when we think about the vision of where we need to go and what's going to happen here in Oakville, you can appreciate there's actually a lot of shifts that we need to be planning for. And
I
those
can
shifts
help you
are,
out
yeah, go ahead,
with
please.
the forecast there.
Yeah, please.
I think it'll take a good 30 years for Halton and Oakville to double
Yeah,
those populations, those general gross numbers. And historically, it's interesting to know that roughly every 30 years, Oakville has doubled its population since it started. So that's I'm trying to say that's normal.
yeah,
But if you double the seniors population in 10 or 15 years, that's dramatic.
that's right.
And that means that I get to ask you, so when are you going to add some more beds, or will
Yeah,
you?
that's right. Well, as you can appreciate, in fact, you were involved in this as well. Part of how the OTMH was redeveloped, part of what was incorporated within that redevelopment was what's called shelled-in space, which is essentially and effectively space that is available for us to redevelop at a future state when we know we're going to need new beds. And what I would say to you is that we do have a full floor at the top of the building and then two half floors. One of them is being used right now as the field hospital. So if anyone here has been admitted into the field hospital or knows someone who has, that's a space that we've been using certainly during the pandemic to support the increase in the growth that we've been seeing in terms of health, the needs for health related services. So we have some expansion opportunities actually in the building itself that we think are opportunities for us. And we're in constant conversation with the government about when the right moment is to kind of pull the trigger on those kinds of spaces. Very expensive, as you can appreciate, but they are going to be needed and necessary for this community. And so we're working on the timing associated with that, really with government and looking to get the government support for that. What I would
Every
say to you
time,
though, yeah,
every
go ahead.
time I see the premier and the health minister, I remind them that it was a condition of Oakville's donation of $130 million that the Sheldon space at least go in. And I remember the initial resistance to the idea. And I actually had to use one of my favorite lines, which is, maybe you know somebody else with $130 million.
Well, one thing that I would say to you is it's interesting for you to say that because what I would say is a lot of the new development, new hospitals after Oakville was built, they pretty much all have Sheldon space in them. And as we think about the future for the Georgetown redevelopment, for example, that's how we're thinking about it too. So how do you phase out given the population projections that we've been just talking about that are so substantial? So what do you build for today? And then what are we building out for the future? So that was very smart thinking in my mind to be thinking about building in that shelled space. So good for you.
It's a Burtonism, think long.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. But I did want to say that, I think it is really important just to say as we look at that growth in the population, the complexity of the patient population as well, when we're thinking about more seniors, I would say there are some priorities for us that we think we need to be focusing on. You just said, what's going to happen in Oakville? Well, a few things that I think are really important, and I won't talk about specifics, but they're directions. The one for sure is that we're going to have to increase the services that we're offering today at the Oakville site. And that would be the truth actually across all three of our sites and across the entire catchment. So we're going to have to grow the volumes of the services that we're providing already. I think that's a no-brainer, but we have to plan for that. That's going to be really critically important for us. And people who come to our emerge already know that this is, they're experiencing that themselves in terms of what the wait times look like. Like we have to ensure that we're really managing that growth. Second is we've got to optimize the services that we're delivering today, and that those issues of flow in hospitals become really, really critical, as you can appreciate. So that's going to be necessary. Like we have to have a very efficient system in the future. And then two other points that I would just make as we think about what's going to happen for Oakville. One of them is care closer to home. So as much as the services we deliver today, we'll have to intensify and deliver more of. Another point that's really important for people to understand is we'll need to be thinking about how we can bring care closer to home. Now, that'll be important for Milton and Georgetown, where a lot of the Milton and Georgetown community actually come to Oakville for their services. But it'll also be important for Oakville as we think about some of the services that people have to leave Oakville to get access to because we haven't had the critical mass to actually deliver those services here. So we'll be thinking about those. There are services we'll want to bring back. And that's going to be really important to us, or not bring back, but bring to Oakville because we'll have the critical mass in order to provide them. So that's really important to us too. And then the next is at home programs. And this is actually a shift the entire health system is experiencing right now is how can we be supporting patients more in their homes, and some of that Halton Healthcare will do itself, but a lot of that will rely on our partners, and we'll just have to be really working very, very closely with our partners to support those kinds of at-home programs. So when you ask the question of, what will be different in Oakville, those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about right now. Is we'll have to intensify those services. We'll have to be as efficient as we possibly can, bring the care closer to home, and be thinking about ways that we can actually support the Oakville community in getting access to services in their home versus having to come to a hospital to get them.
The COVID field hospital in the building as opposed to in a tent,
Yeah,
which actually a neighboring hospital
that's
did a
very
field
true.
hospital first with a giant tent.
Yep.
And I was on the board then, and I said, we've got all this empty space. Surely we can one up these people. So that's, I think, how I like to remember it. But that added some beds. And so I have to set that aside to ask the question, when we opened OTMH, the new one, we did not gain any beds. And so the main bed count hasn't changed. And yet the population has grown a lot. And we don't, to the best of my knowledge, we have not experienced hallway medicine. And that tells me the hospital up to now has been a beaver at increasing efficiency. And, and yes, that's a bouquet I'm throwing to Halton Healthcare. But I'm really interested in when does that efficiency gain run out? Surely, you can't efficiency down to zero, I don't
You
think.
absolutely can't. That's right. What I would say to you is that as much as the bedded numbers didn't grow before the pandemic, because of what we were doing during the pandemic, and that includes the field hospital, we are currently operating close to 70 to 80, depending on the day, unfunded spaces in the hospital. So that's something new. And that's really come out of I think, this is post-pandemic world in some ways. So this was spaces that we created to really support the flow for patients. So this is a very efficient operation in the first place. I feel really strongly about that, and the organization can take a lot of pride in how we've been successful at that. And that is absolutely essential. As I mentioned, it's fundamental to our success.
Yeah.
But to your point, we are hitting these pressure points already. If we didn't have the field hospital, we would be in big trouble. So the fact that that was an approved strategy is really critical for us to actually maintain. Now, do we want to keep them in a field hospital like setting?
No.
Probably not. And that's part of what we, of course, and that's the reason why we're actively working with the government to try to get the green light to actually build out and fit out that space and have that space available. And also looking at whether or not we have capacity elsewhere in the organization to be maximizing. So, totally agree with you. When that efficiency, when will we hit that marker? What the consultants we're working on today have told us, if nothing changes, we would need 100 more beds 5 years from now, largely in Oakville. So that's predominantly in Oakville, although there's a portion of that would be in Milton. So it's already happening now. We're already sort of hitting those markers, and in fact, that's part of what's impacting our long waits in ED, for example, has to do with the pressure that we're experiencing.
Well, all I can say to that is I'm ready and willing, and I think able to help you on your signal. I never run to get in the way, but I will do everything I can to try to help get the government to say yes. I'm a little distressed that they haven't said yes yet.
Well, we really do appreciate that support for sure. I would say what we've been working with the government on in terms of some of that space is to look at what the potential regional opportunities could be as well. So all of the hospital systems and, William Osler, for example, Trillium Health Partners, people will know this in this region, are feeling an enormous amount of pressure as well. And one of the things we were quite successful at doing during the pandemic was really acting like one health system, the Team Ontario kind of approach for health. And so part of what we've really been talking to our partners in government about when it comes to the space is, obviously we know we'll need it for Oakville, but we also need the support regionally. And so how can we make the regional model to support this as well? So believe me, we feel similarly. We would love to get this project approved. We certainly are in active conversations about that and would love your support.
You've got it.
Trying to
I
get this
worry
through.
that if we don't
Yeah.
do that,
We'll lose time. Yeah.
we've got 70 or 80
right.
beds that are, let me call it second tier beds. And so if you allow me to lean on the phrase two-tier healthcare, we're practicing two-tier healthcare in order to keep people out of the hallways. And so there's a public campaign available to be built around that theme, but maybe we can get to success without going there.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying too. I think what I would say is we have tried our hardest in the hospital too to make those spaces comfortable for patients, but you're not wrong in saying, it's curtains, there's not the easy access to bathrooms. We've been really smart about which patient populations we put in the field hospital. We actually don't get a lot of complaints in the field hospital, and I think that's because we've really tried to make the care as exceptional as we could. Shorter stays in the field hospital as well, but that can't be the permanent solution for forever. Agree with you on that, certainly.
Yeah. So let's turn to that question of expanding healthcare in the home. It strikes home for me because this year, my dad, who was almost 100, began to have illness in January. And he desperately wanted to, have his health care delivered at home. And he was My dad was a very forceful and determined guy, and he had his
Like
way.
someone else we know, right? Yeah, exactly.
Oh no, you haven't seen anything like him. I'm a sweetie pie. And then about 7 months later, he had, at his insistence, home hospice. He was determined that he was going to fight out his last health battle and die at home. And he died happy and competent. So so it really brought it home to me that expanding healthcare into the home probably has legs. There's probably, I mean, I don't think my dad's that unusual. What can you say about what you're going to do, what that's going to look like? Or is it
Yeah,
going to
so
look
there's,
like just what my dad did?
well, in some ways, I actually think that's an excellent example of how home care, how the uh, hospital to home, and in some ways that's not even hospital, right? That's hospice care at home. Home care is so critical to the future of our healthcare system, and that's a great example of when it works really effectively, and it's what the public really wants. So I would say to you, this has been a big priority. That actually, in particular, so palliative care at home has been a significant priority for what we call our OHT. So it's an Ontario Health Team here. It's intended to be all of the partners, all of the health related partners, excuse me, in a region working collaboratively together on shared collaborative projects focusing on populations. And the one population, there's been three, but one of the populations that's been identified for Halton has been really focusing on palliative at home. So exactly what just happened for your father, and that's exactly one of the programs that's actually been probably quite, one of our most successful, I would say, in terms of how our OHT has been functioning. What I would say to you is that there's also lots of opportunities for us to be doing remote care monitoring. So there's examples of folks who will end up in hospital and really they're staying, staying overnight because they need to be closely monitored. And one of the things that I would say to you that's also been a priority for this OHT work, again, we don't do this alone. This is done in partnership with our primary care um, partners in this community with our home and community care. So there's other agencies that actually provide home and community care, but working collaboratively together, all of us looking at how we can provide more remote care monitoring for patients in their homes. And that actually is typically technology of some kind. So it'll be monitors of some kind that actually go into the home with patients. And then also potentially in some circumstances, it's our nurses. In other circumstances, it's home and community care nurses, or it could be PSWs that'll come into the home and check on patients. These are really, really important strategies for us to be thinking about how we can keep people out of hospital who could stay home and they want to be home more than be in hospital anyway, or actually divert people from, it's really ED avoidance. So instead of having to come into the hospital for an ED admission, which nobody loves, being able
Wait,
to stay
wait.
at home too.
We've reached acronym overload.
Yeah, I probably did that,
So
didn't
ED.
Emergency department, yes, in the
Okay.
emergency
And
department.
let's back up to
Yeah.
OHT because you said OHT so many times.
Yeah, sorry for using an acronym there. So OHT stands for Ontario Health Team. And this is one of the government's major priorities when it comes to healthcare is trying to find ways for the healthcare system to be more integrated. And this is, every government everywhere has some focus on integrated care and trying to make the healthcare system more integrated for patients, more seamless for the patients in terms of their journey through the healthcare system. So how OHTs, so again, Ontario Health Teams in Ontario are structured, and we're actually, Halton region is part of two. So there's an OHT in Burlington, as well as Connected Care Halton, which is the OHT that Halton Healthcare, is involved in. That includes Oakville, Milton, as well as Halton Hills. Um, the concept for the OHT is that all of the health related providers are working together under the umbrella of the OHT to support population health. So the focus is intended to be about looking at the population, where the population is potentially underserviced, or where we need to be putting more support for healthcare services for individuals, and then really developing action plans. So what I like to call shared collaborative projects between all of the partners to try to help address that particular gap in the healthcare system. So we all did lots and lots of work during the pandemic together, but this is where we do lots of this kind of work where we look at palliative at home, for example, looking at remote care monitoring, for example. So a group of health related providers, primary care, hospital care, home and community care, lots of the community agencies working collaboratively together to address population growth. And this
Oh,
is the latest.
Are you organized in different tables of subject matters?
Yes, that's right. So the way in which the OHTs have really organized is to say, again, there's sort of the main table that's looking at the population itself and how that population needs to be serviced. And so really looking at the data. And then there's the tables that have been struck to work on very specific projects. And that's where we have a digital table that's working on things, as I mentioned, remote care monitoring. We have a table that's really focused on mental health and addictions in particular. And I think that it's fair for me to say that in Halton, we are a very large provider of mental health and addiction services, but there are gaps here that we know we need to be addressing. So that became a major priority for this OHT. And then another major focus has really been on palliative care. And then there's also been an emphasis, in particular in this region, on really trying to connect primary care and hospitals more directly. So more seamless transition of records, more access to consultations for your family doctors to talk to a specialist directly when they're concerned about a patient. So that's really been the emphasis on this in this OHT, is to focus there. You were asking about the generation of integrated care, though.
Yeah.
This is not LHINs. This is something quite different. This is really the providers working together. Eventually, the government intends to actually put all the money for health services into the OHT, but that's a long time and many years away. Right now, it really is about these shared collaborative projects. But again, I would just emphasize and I'm losing light here, every generation, or sorry, every health system is looking at integrated care and trying to find ways in which they can support integrated care. This really is the world agenda at the moment.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
One of my daughters is in health policy in the United States, and she tells me that the very same thing. And I just read, I think yesterday, that we have a crisis in how little we pay family physicians, and so we're losing family physicians. And lo and behold, Rachel says that's their number one big problem in the States as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so I guess I hope two countries worrying about the same thing can lead to a solution. In the minute that or so that we've got left, I just want to ask you one thing about this OHT and the tables. Many of the groups that you're mentioning as being part of the OHT are probably part of the table system in the Halton Region Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And I hope we're not tabling everybody out, so to speak.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. And I should have mentioned, and that was not very fair for me to be mentioning, I should have mentioned that the Halton region is an active participant in the OHT as well. And part of what the teams have really tried to do is make sure that we're not over-tabling people. So to your point, so there is maybe a little bit of duplication, but it's for different purposes. And we have been trying to figure out how we can sort of right-size those tables and make sure that people are at the right places. Yeah. Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you.
go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving us your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.